Right now, the amount of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth news that we're getting is absolutely insane. Every single day, something new is coming out of the Tokyo Game Show, leading up to tonight, where we're supposed to be getting some big reveal, where they're going to be doing a stage show, showing off a ton of new stuff on the game. It is all really exciting, and most of it is really good news. I'm extremely impressed, and today we got some more news coming straight from the Square Enix blog. So we're going to read that together and see what's going on. So the first thing here is Hamaguchi saying, how much of the story of the original Final Fantasy VII is included in this game? Hamaguchi says, I'll say that the locations covered in this game go up to the Forgotten Capital. Now, if you played the original game, you know what happens there. And I think this is going to be a pretty good point to leave off the next game on. It is going to be pretty heartbreaking, assuming that the thing that does happen there does happen. We still don't know. You know, that's kind of the big mystery that's happening with this game. Did us changing fate at the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake mean that this is no longer destined to happen? That's something that we're just gonna have to see going forward. Next he was asked, but you don't need to have played that game or Final Fantasy VII Remake for this one though, right? And he replied, no, all three of the remake games have been designed as standalone games in their own right. Any can be enjoyed fully even if you haven't experienced the previous games. I don't know about all that. I do think it's worthwhile to play Final Fantasy VII Remake before Rebirth, but it's not essential. If you want to know what happened in the previous game, there is a Story So Far Digest movie in the game that will get you up to speed. Now, of course, this has been subjected to a little bit of debate, right? Because of course you do need to play Final Fantasy VII Remake if you're going to take in everything from Rebirth. Now, as they mentioned here, there is a Story Digest that will catch you up on the broad strokes of the story. But honestly, there is some debate if you need to play the original Final Fantasy VII before you can fully grasp what's going on in Remake. There's also the idea that this game is actually a sequel to the original game and not just a remake. And if that's the case, then I feel like you do have a lot of things to catch up on. So yeah, as he does recommend here, play Final Fantasy VII Remake before Rebirth. I would say so too. I don't know if it's completely necessary how much of a standalone title Rebirth will be, but I feel like just to understand the concept of Final Fantasy VII Remake, you at least need to watch a recap of the original. And I don't think it's completely necessary, but I do think you do want at least a little bit of foundational knowledge in FF7. Next up, he was asked, the Final Fantasy VII Remake had one of my favorite combat systems of any RPG. I agree, it was a brilliant battle system. How have you built on it for this new game? The combat system is still based on the system from Final Fantasy VII Remake. With Rebirth, we've added new elements that focus on team-up attacks with your allies. By observing the flow of battle and switching party leader at the right time, you can use synergy skills and abilities to gain an advantage over your enemies. Again, Final Fantasy VII Remake's battle system is something that I've had high praise for. Now, of course, I've had my fair share of criticisms when it comes to the game's new plot elements and the arbiters and some of the multiverse stuff, but I think the biggest victory of the game for me was definitely the game's combat. It's just absolutely brilliant. And if you played Final Fantasy VII Remake Intermission, the DLC for the first game, then you know just how well they've built on that combat system and the way these new team attacks are going to work. It's something that I'm really excited about and that I really enjoyed about Intermission. So honestly, I'm just extremely looking forward to the combat in this game and the way each and every character is going to play, not just the new characters in the game, but also the characters that we've already played as. They've refreshed Cloud. They made him even better than he was in the previous game, at least according to the previews. So every character that you already love, they're gonna play even better in this one. How has the materia system evolved from the previous game? Is there any new materia to look forward to? There are many more types of materia in Final Fantasy VII Remake, and these allow for exciting new combinations in battle. For example, there are materia that automate some of your actions in battle like an AI, as well as some other new exciting types. Now that's really really cool. Something that some people have been pushing for in this game is for it to have something like a gambit system. For those who haven't played Final Fantasy XII, it was a system where you could essentially program your party members to do certain basic actions under certain conditions. And it's a really well remembered system just because it allowed you to have that most minute control over party member AI in such a way that I really can't think of any other game that's quite allowed you to have that level of control. And it's something that people have wanted to see broadened back. And the first Final Fantasy VII Remake game does have some auto materia that lets you have control over party member actions. But it'll be interesting to see how they're going to further improve that, and it sounds to me like Hamaguchi is suggesting here they got a lot more stuff here that's going to allow you to have control over your party members, so that's just wonderful. The most recent trailer revealed that there are lots of Chocobo types in the game. Why was this so important to show? He says we wanted to pay homage to the original Final Fantasy VII. There are many different types of Chocobo in that game, such as river Chocobos or the mountain Chocobos. One of the big draws of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is that you can explore the vast world map, so we reimagined different Chocobos to become important features of that exploration. You can use them to fly through the air, climb mountains, speed across water surfaces. You can also enjoy the Chocobos you have collected in another way, by entering them in the Gold Saucer Chocobo races. Again, I love that there is different types of Chocobos that are going to be used for traversal. I think it's been a really long time since there's been a Final Fantasy game that has really done exploration well. 15 tried to do it well with its open world, but it was pretty heavily criticized. There were a lot of issues with it. It was quite barren. Will they be getting it right with this game? I'm not sure, right? I think one of the issues I had with 15's open world was that you spent a lot of time in the car, and so it felt like you were driving past the open world rather than out in it, interacting with it. And I think if you play a game like Breath of the Wild, for example, or Tears of the Kingdom, you're out there in the world, interacting with it constantly, moving around it. And so this, to me, kind of puts you back in the center of the world, collecting things, investigating the environment, and not just moving past it at such a breakneck speed. The world does look massive. How difficult was it to interpret the world map of the original Final Fantasy VII or this new game? Hamaguchi saying, this was one of the hardest challenges we faced when developing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. There are a lot of games out there that let you explore a limited area of a specific location, but we haven't seen that many games that let you travel and explore a whole world. If that world is too massive, then it makes it harder for the game to work. But if it's too small, then you don't get the feeling of being in a massive world in the first place. We put a lot of thought and hard work into getting that balance right to fulfill both requirements. That's something that Final Fantasy used to do, was let you experience the entire world. Nowadays, with AAA games especially, we don't depict games in the same super deformed style that we used to, that would feature a relatively large person running around an overworld map. No, now everything is rendered at 1:1 scale, very realistic. Unfortunately, this makes depicting an entire world a really difficult thing to do. It's really challenging. So you can't really have the same level of detail in an entire world that you normally do. Final Fantasy XVI tried to bypass this by having the little teleport points on the map, and each point was like this own zone on its own, and they were all disconnected. Unfortunately, the kind of downside of that was that it ended up feeling as though the world itself was disconnected because of the way these zones didn't just flow into each other. However, here we do have an entire interconnected map, and this is something that is huge. I don't even think people realize just how huge this is, because it means that things like an airship is now possible, right? That's only possible if you have a physically connected landmass by which you're flying over. So in any type of zone type game, you're not really able to do that in the same way. Here, you're actually going to be able to probably fly the high wind, and that's huge, because that's something that I personally didn't think they were going to be able to do, because I thought that this was going to be zoned. And frankly, I also thought before this, new update, that it wasn't going to be this massive. They weren't going to go fully into the open world again, especially after Final Fantasy 15. But that's what they're doing here. Hopefully it will kind of be received better than how Final Fantasy 15 was received in terms of its open world. But everything they've shown off so far does inspire faith. So I say, let's let them do their thing. It's not just Chocobos, of course. There are vehicles too. The buggy in particular has had an awesome redesign from the original game. How did you capture the look of the original vehicle? Well, while making it seem fresh and new. We did a lot of research in order to decide things like the basic structure, type of tires, and so on. We look into the kinds of modern motor vehicles used in deserts and on poor quality roads, including military vehicles. Next, we looked at the external appearance. Design elements such as the jet engine at the rear for acceleration and the propeller screws for traveling across the water surface were included to hark back to the somewhat fantastical buggy design in the original FF7. However, we paid special attention to designing these fictional elements in a way that made them look real and functional. Honestly, the buggy looks awesome here. I love that there's vehicles. This is something, again, you really haven't seen too much in modern FF other than 15, which did feature a vehicle. For sure. You did get to modify it a little bit. You know, you had the Regalia Type F, and then later on they patched in the Regalia Type D that lets you do the off-roading stuff. But in general, you know, modern Final Fantasy titles, especially ones post and including 10, didn't really have any vehicles for you to explore the world with. And I really think that that was also something unique about Final Fantasy compared to other RPGs, is that, you know, in other RPGs, maybe you get a horse, right? And your horse is the mount, and then you have fast travel. One thing that was awesome about FF7 and a lot of the older Final Fantasies was that you got different vehicles, and eventually it all culminated in you getting like the ultimate airship that could fly anywhere. But you know, you had the buggy, you had the car in FF8, you had other means of getting around, and then it would escalate to that thing where you had the ultimate means to get around. And I'm just really glad to see the buggies back. I'm loving what they're doing with Chocobos. I love that there is an emphasis not just on how great it is to explore the world, but how great it is to actually have the means to explore the world through these vehicles. I think that's something unique, especially compared to maybe a lot of other AAA games. The most recent trailer also showed Cloud zipping along the two-wheeled wheelie. Can you tell us a little bit about this fun little machine? We want to have the player experience the feelings of liberation and freedom in Costa del Sol resort area. So we've given Cloud and the gang a fun and quirky little vehicle to scoot around on rather than walking like usual. There's also a special promotional campaign being run in the game where you can earn souvenirs from traveling certain distances on them. So I urge players to take them for a spin while you visit Costa del Sol. So that explains the distance travel that we see in the right corner that everyone's been wondering about. So you'll be able to do that. Again, there is a massive emphasis on mini games in this game in such a way that we haven't seen from Final Fantasy in forever. I mean, outside of 14, which, you know, has like its own gold saucer and the mini games that they add in it. But in the single player series, I don't think we've ever seen such a big emphasis on the return of mini games. Mini games are part of the soul of Final Fantasy VII, and I think it's something that absolutely has to be there. Then he was asked, what about the tiny Bronco? Can we expect to see that too? And good news. Of course, the tiny Bronco will appear. Due to the events of the story, the time that it can actually fly is very short, yes. But you can still use it after the wings have been damaged to cross the oceans freely, just like in the original game. I don't know what else to say here other than awesome. Just awesome. Again, gameplay is just shaping up to be pretty much everything I've wanted from an FF game. Then we got the part that I'm a little concerned about, as you may have seen in some of my videos. What new story elements can we expect from the game? As with Final Fantasy VII Remake, we have been careful to maintain the storyline from the original game, while at the same time adding extra story content to make it flesh out as a remake. In addition to the main story, there has also been a huge amount of new side content added, and you can expect to see a new story told through that as well. In addition to the main story, there's also a huge amount of new side content added, and you can expect to see new story told through that as well. Now, my hope with the new side content is that it actually lives up to what it's supposed to be. I remember before the first game came out, they had made some claims that the side content in Remake was going to be on par with that of the main story content. I don't quite think that was true, to be honest. The side quests weren't, you know, the worst thing I've ever experienced in a game, but I don't know if I could quite get to the point where I would say that the side quests were on par with the main story as they had promised before the first game. Here, I want to believe it, but that is something that I'm probably going to have to see to believe. And my hope is that they can make that side content that is something where I'm like, you need to play all the side quests in this game. And not just for the rewards, but honestly because they tell great stories within them. Moving forward, he was asked, how does that new side content affect the structure of the game? He replied, unlike the previous title, which had new content made available to the player following the developments in the story, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has been designed to allow the player to freely select what order to play much of its content in. Accordingly, it has also been structured so that none of the side content becomes cut off and you never lose an opportunity to go back and play it. That's huge. Regardless of how far you've played into the story. That means you can always take a detour and explore the expansive and vibrant world whenever the mood takes you. Again, this is so huge for me. I can't even begin to describe. One of my biggest problems with Final Fantasy VII Remake's design was that it kind of coerced you to doing the side content right then and there, because if you didn't do it right then you would miss out on those rewards pretty much until you got to New Game Plus around. You can go back to that chapter and do the side content again. However, whenever you're playing this game, you're going to be able to do the side content whenever you want to. So if that means coming back 5 to 10 hours later after you first found it, you can do that. It's not chapter locked. It is not locked to where you are in the story. You know, when you find it, when you do those quests, you can go and do them as you want to, as you please. You're not going to miss out on rewards that you can't get until New Game Plus. This is huge. I like this so much more. Next, they're going to talk about mini games. Many people remember the original Final Fantasy VII for having lots of mini games. For that reason, we felt it was important to let the player come across minigames while exploring the world in Rebirth 2. There are actually even more in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth than in the original game. I don't know what else to say other than I approve. I think minigames are part of the core DNA of Final Fantasy VII. It's part of the soul. Now, this reveal right here is pretty interesting because it sounds like we're going to have some type of triple triad type thing happening here. Hamaguchi was asked what his personal favorite minigame was, and he said out of all the different minigames available, the card game Queen's Blood could be said to be one of the headliners. It's an in-world card game that is very popular in the world of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and a minigame that can be played many times from the start of your adventure to the end. Winning matches doesn't just let you enhance your deck, you can also follow a unique Queen's Blood story as well. The narrative progresses as you engage in more challenges in matches. As you guys may or may not know, my favorite FF minigame of all time, without a shadow of a doubt, is Triple Triad. I love Triple Triad. I think it should be in every Final Fantasy game going forward. I love playing it in Final Fantasy XIV. I am a huge Triple Triad nerd. I don't know how Queen's Blood is going to play. I don't know if it's going to be anything remotely similar to what is in Final Fantasy VIII with Triple Triad. What I can say is I am super psyched to see it, and I love that it also has its own unique storyline that is going to be followed with playing it, and you know, hopefully it's worth it. Can we expect to see new elements in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth that are taken from the compilation of Final Fantasy VII? I cannot reveal full details yet, but there are many characters and details added to Rebirth that weren't featured in the original Final Fantasy VII, but were seen in the compilation. I'm just gonna translate that for you guys. It means Genesis confirmed. Hate to break it to you. Final Fantasy VII Remake had a fantastical music score that combined iconic themes with entirely new pieces. What can we expect from the Rebirth soundtrack? Just like for Remake, we have created a huge number of arrangements of original music, as well as new tracks to go alongside all the changing situations in the story. You can expect great things from the music this time around too. And then finally, what are you excited for fans to experience in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth? This game has tens of hours of side content spread around the game world, outside of the main story. It's fine to ignore the main story if you want, or go off and explore the world map. To experience side content whenever you like at a suitable junction in the narrative. Where to go and what to start from is entirely down to the player. I can't wait to see them enjoy the freedom of choice that the game gives them. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. There was a lot of criticism for how linear Final Fantasy VII Remake was, and quite honestly, how linear Final Fantasy games have been for quite some time. This game is going to offer you freedom. It is going to hopefully do it better than, say, what 15 did. It was a game that kind of got a little criticism for its structuring on its open world. I am hoping for the best here. This game has continuously blown me away with all of its new updates. I am still a skeptic of what's going on with this sequel multiverse story, but I gotta say that with the gameplay, they have completely and utterly won me over. From the way everything sounds, this sounds like it could be like the perfect Final Fantasy game from a gameplay perspective, and that's awesome. It feels like they finally nailed down the formula. So as always, I'm gonna hope for the best, and let's see what they can cook.